I never thought I'd find myself sitting in a room full of knitters, needles clicking away like a quirky little orchestra, but here I am, clutching my first ever ball of yarn like it's a life raft. Honestly, I came to the knitting club on a dare. Well, sort of. My best friend Sarah swore it would be calming, a good way to unwind after the chaos of my marketing job. Plus, the club met at this tiny cafe downtown with the best cheesecake, so I figured, why not? What I didn't expect was to be the only other guy besides this one guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a vintage indie film. Tall, with these dark curls that always seemed tousled just right, a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, and glasses that framed eyes so sharp they made me feel like I was under some unspoken scrutiny. He was sitting near the window, the afternoon sun casting a halo around his head, concentrating on a scarf that looked way too complicated for a first project, at least compared to my awkward attempt at a square potholder. I don't knit. Not really. I can barely tie my sneakers without messing it up. But here I was, trying to follow the rhythm of the knitters around me, feeling like I had wandered into some secret society. The room smelled like cinnamon and old books, and there was this soft hum of chatter mixed with the clicking needles. It was peaceful, but also kind of surreal, given that I'd spent most of my life avoiding anything remotely crafty. So yeah, the fact that this guy was the only other dude here made me curious. Usually, knitting clubs are like grandma's garden, full of women who could knit a sweater without looking. But him? He looked like he actually belonged here, like this wasn't some weird hobby but a part of who he was. I caught him glancing my way a few times, like he was trying to decide if I was a joke or some kind of undercover knitting prodigy. Spoiler, I'm neither. By the end of the first hour, my fingers were a tangled mess, and my scarf looked more like a weird lopsided noodle. I was halfway tempted to give up and just order another slice of cheesecake, but then he spoke. Need some help with that? His voice was low, a little rough around the edges, but not in a bad way. More like someone who didn't waste words, but also wasn't trying to be intimidating. I turned to face him, feeling my cheeks heat up because, well, I wasn't exactly expecting help from the only other guy. And definitely not help that came with a smile like that. Yeah, actually. I have no idea what I'm doing, I admitted, holding up my pathetic mess of yarn. He laughed, this genuine, easy laugh that filled the space between us. You picked the advanced pattern for your first try, rookie move. Here, let me show you. And just like that, the afternoon shifted. Knitting needles and awkward introductions aside, I realized maybe this wasn't going to be the most boring night of my life after all. He scooted his chair a little closer, and before I knew it, his fingers were expertly untangling my yarn disaster. I'm not kidding when I say he made it look effortless, as if those tangled knots in my scarf were just a minor annoyance on his knitting highway. His hands moved with this smooth confidence, and I found myself watching him instead of the mess I'd made. So you're new here? He asked, eyes never leaving the yarn. Yeah, first time. Sarah dared me to come, I said, trying to sound casual but ending up sounding like a total dork. She thought it'd be good for me. He raised an eyebrow. Dared you? Like a bet? Kind of. I'm not exactly the crafting type, more like the binge Netflix and order takeout type. I joked. He smiled, the kind of smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle just enough to be charming without trying. I'm Alex, he said, as he handed back the now mostly untangled yarn. I shook his hand, and it felt a little electric, which caught me off guard. I'm Matt. We fell into a kind of easy rhythm. He showed me how to hold the needles properly, how to count stitches, when to tighten the yarn. I was a slow learner, but he was patient, which was a refreshing change from my usual impatient self. So what got you into knitting? I asked, genuinely curious. I'd always figured it was something you learned from a family member or picked up in a moment of zen, but Alex's vibe didn't scream hip grandma, so I was intrigued. He paused, eyes flicking toward the window like he was remembering something. My mom taught me when I was a kid. She was really good at it. It was kind of our thing before she passed. I guess knitting's my way of feeling connected to her. That hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just a hobby for him. It was personal. I nodded, not quite knowing what to say, only feeling the sudden weight of the moment between us. I'm sorry, I finally said, then added, "That's really cool though. I can see why you'd stick with it." He smiled again, softer this time. "Thanks. So what about you? Why'd you come?" I shrugged, the yarn still tangled in my fingers. "Honestly? Stress. Work's been brutal, and I needed something to slow down. Plus, Sarah's cheesecake bribe was pretty convincing." He laughed, and I felt the tension break a little. "Well, you picked a good place for cheesecake and stress relief." The meeting was winding down, people packing up their bags or admiring their finished projects. I glanced at my scarf attempt, which was improving if you ignored the occasional stray stitch that threatened to unravel everything. "Look at you, already a pro," Alex teased. "More like a beginner who's barely holding it together." I said, but I was smiling. Being here, even if I looked like a total novice, felt right, like this was a moment out of my usual chaotic routine. As everyone started leaving, Alex looked at me with the hint of something I couldn't quite place. Maybe hope? Or maybe just curiosity. "You coming back next week?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I might." "Cool. I'll save you a seat." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the knitting club, the warmth of the cafe, the soft click of needles, and most of all, Alex. Who knew a room full of knitters would be the place I'd find something, or someone, that made the crazy stuff outside seem a little less overwhelming? The next week came faster than I expected. When I walked in, Alex was already there, waving me over with that same easy smile. This time, he brought a coffee for me, black, just how I liked it. We settled into our spots, and this time I noticed the little details. The way his fingers moved over the yarn, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his latest project, and the way he laughed at my terrible jokes like they were the funniest thing he'd heard all day. Halfway through the session, someone asked if anyone wanted to lead the club's next project, and before I could stop myself, I heard my own voice saying, I could try. Alex looked surprised, then smiled like he was proud of me. "I'll help you." "Deal," I said. That night I found myself looking forward to Wednesdays, not just for the knitting, but for Alex. It was weird and unexpected, but sometimes the strangest places led to the best parts of your life. And honestly, I was ready to see where this thread would take us. Taking on the next project felt way more ambitious than I'd planned. The knitting club wasn't just a casual hang. These people treated their projects like big deals. And now I was in the spotlight. I guess when you're the only other guy, any move you make is more noticeable. But Alex was right there to back me up. And honestly, having him beside me made it less intimidating. So the next Wednesday rolls around, and I show up with a little more confidence and a plan. I wanted to pick something simple enough to not scare off the group, but interesting enough to keep us engaged. After a quick chat with the organizer, I settled on a chunky knit beanie, practical, seasonal, and not too complex, which was perfect for my level of yarn competency. Alex was already at our usual spot when I arrived, his dark curls even messier than the week before, and a cup of that black coffee waiting for me. "Right on time," he said, grinning. "Ready to lead the knitting revolution?" I laughed and took the coffee. More like trying not to embarrass myself. We set up our needles and yarn, and I felt the familiar nervous excitement bubbling under my ribs. As the group gathered around, I started explaining the project. A little shaky at first, but Alex gave me these little reassuring nods that kept me going. "Okay, so first we cast on 40 stitches," I said, watching the group follow along. Alex leaned over and quietly corrected my finger placement, and I was grateful for his subtle help. As the afternoon wore on, the beanie started to take shape, and the room filled with that comforting collective focus. People chatted in between stitches about work, life, dating disasters, and favorite TV shows. Alex and I fell into an easy back and forth, sharing stories about our day jobs and the weird little things that made the week drag or fly by. At one point, the conversation drifted to relationships, and someone mentioned their recent breakup. The room grew a little quieter, a collective empathy settling over us. "What about you, Matt?" Alex asked quietly, his tone gentle but curious. I hesitated. It's not like I had a long list of epic romances to share. Honestly, dating had been a mixed bag. Awkward first dates, mismatched expectations, and a whole lot of ghosting. But there was something about the way Alex looked at me then like he genuinely wanted to know, that made me open up a little. I guess I've been kind of burnt out on dating. I admitted. Feels like everyone's just swiping through the motions, you know? I'm not sure if I'm looking for anything serious or just something real. Alex nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. I've been there. It's hard to find someone who's genuine when everything feels so fast and surface level. Our eyes met, and for a moment the noise of the knitting needles and quiet chatter faded into the background. There was this unspoken understanding between us, like we were both acknowledging something without needing to say it outright. Minutes later, the group wrapped up and people started packing their bags. Alex and I lingered behind, reluctant to break the rhythm. "Want to grab a drink?" he asked, casual but hopeful. "Yeah, I'd like that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was doing this weird jumpy thing. We walked to a nearby bar, the kind with cozy booths and dim lighting that made everything feel a little more intimate. Over beers, the conversation shifted from knitting to music, travel, and favorite movies. I learned that Alex had a thing for old jazz records and had spent a summer backpacking through Europe. I told him about my failed attempts at cooking and how I'd almost set my kitchen on fire trying to make pasta. Somewhere between the third round of drinks and a shared playlist on his phone, I realized how easy it was to talk to him. Not like the nervous fumbling I expected, but like I'd known him longer than a few weeks of knitting club meetings. At one point, he laughed and said, "You're way more interesting than you give yourself credit for." I felt my cheeks warm. "I'm just glad I didn't scare you off after my first disaster scarf." He smiled, a little softer this time. "Nah, that was entertaining." Outside, the night air was cool, and the city lights blurred slightly with the buzz of the evening. We walked to the bus stop, and I felt this strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, "would you want to do this again sometime? I mean, the drinks, not just the knitting club." He looked at me, those sharp eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Hope? Interest? Something more? "I'd like that," he said simply. The bus rumbled up, and we stepped on together, standing close in the crowded space. When it was my stop, I hesitated, then said, "Hey, Alex." "Yeah? Thanks for today. For everything." He smiled, and it felt like the start of something real. "Same here, Matt." As I got off the bus and watched it pull away, I realized the knitting club wasn't just about finding a new hobby. It was about finding someone who made the messy, tangled parts of life feel a little less overwhelming. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at something unexpected and good. The days after that night passed in this weird bubble of excitement, mixed with nerves I wasn't used to. It wasn't that I'd never felt a spark before, but something about Alex made everything feel a bit more possible. Like I could slow down and actually enjoy the moments instead of rushing through them. We texted a bit over the next few days, mostly about knitting, because that was our common ground, but also little things like favorite songs or dumb jokes. It was casual, but there was an undercurrent of something more, like we were both testing the waters without wanting to jump in too fast. Then, one evening, Alex sent me a message that said, "I found this weird little yarn shop that's supposed to have the best selection in town. Want to check it out this weekend?" I didn't have to think about it. Absolutely. Saturday came, and the yarn shop turned out to be this tiny, tucked-away gem on a side street filled with every color and texture you could imagine. The walls were lined with shelves stacked high with skeins, and the smell of wool and something like peppermint filled the air. Alex immediately went to a corner where some hand-dyed yarns were displayed, picking up a skein that looked like a sunset in shades of orange and purple. "I'm thinking scarf number 2, he said, holding it up for me to see. I laughed. "Ambitious. I'm still figuring out that beanie." He grinned and handed me a soft, pale blue yarn. "Here, let's make matching scarves." I raised an eyebrow. "Matching scarves? You're moving fast." "No such thing as too fast with knitting," he said, winking. We spent the next hour wandering the aisles, talking about colors and patterns, and for the first time, I felt completely at ease just being around him. It wasn't about impressing or figuring things out, it was about enjoying the simple stuff, like debating whether a pattern was too complicated or just right. Outside, the day had turned crisp and golden, the kind of fall afternoon that makes you want to stay outside forever. Alex suggested grabbing coffee at a nearby cafe, and we ended up sitting by the window, watching people pass by while we sipped our drinks. So, I said, twisting my scarf unfinished in my hands, "What's your story? Like, beyond knitting and missing your mom?" He looked out the window, fingers tapping on his cup. "I grew up in a small town. Never really fit in there, you know? Always felt like the odd one out. Knitting was this weird little escape from everything else." "That makes sense," I said. "I always thought knitting was kind of an odd hobby for a guy, but now I get it. It's not about what people think. It's about what you need." He nodded. "Exactly. It's like this quiet way to slow down, to hold on to something, when everything else feels like it's spinning too fast." There was a silence between us, comfortable but charged. I wanted to reach out, to see if he felt this too. Before I could say anything, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "It's work." I should probably check in. I felt this little pang, like I wanted more time with him, but wasn't sure how to ask. "Hey," he said, looking back at me. "How about next Wednesday, after knitting club, we try that new taco place? I hear they have killer margaritas." I smiled, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest. Sounds perfect. The week went by in a blur of work deadlines and stolen moments thinking about that evening. When Wednesday rolled around, I showed up at the club feeling a mix of excitement and nerves, like I was about to go on a first date. Alex was already there, looking casually handsome in a worn denim jacket and that messy hair of his. We wrapped up the knitting session quickly, eager to get to the tacos. The restaurant was lively, with string lights hanging overhead and the smell of grilled spices filling the air. We shared plates of food, laughed over ridiculous stories, and traded more than just yarn knowledge. At one point, Alex reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly over mine. The touch was electric but not overwhelming, a gentle promise in the middle of the chaos. "Matt," he said softly, "I'm really glad you came to knitting club that first time." "Me too," I replied, heart pounding. That night, as we walked back through the quiet streets, the city's glow wrapping around us, I realized something important. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. A chance dare, a knitting club, a guy who's just as out of place as you are. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something worth holding on to. That night, after we said goodbye, I walked home with this strange mix of excitement and nervousness churning in my stomach. It wasn't just the usual thrill of a new crush. It felt deeper, like the possibility of something real, something that could actually last. I kept replaying the way his fingers brushed mine at the taco place, that soft, unspoken connection that said more than words ever could. The next few days were a blur of texting and small moments, little check-ins, goofy memes, and plans for the next knitting club meetup. I started noticing how much I looked forward to those Wednesdays, not just for the club itself, but for the chance to see Alex, to share stories and stolen glances, and the rare kind of silence that feels comfortable, not awkward. One Wednesday, as the club was winding down, Alex pulled me aside. "Hey Matt, want to come over after this? I'm binge watching that show everyone's been talking about." I hesitated for a second. Hanging out at his place felt like a step up from our usual public hangouts, but the idea of spending more time with him in a quieter space was too tempting to pass up. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was pounding. His place was this cozy little apartment a few blocks from the cafe, bookshelves packed with novels, a record player with a pile of vinyls sitting nearby, and this giant, impossibly fluffy couch that immediately swallowed me whole. Alex had lit a few candles, and the soft glow made everything feel warm and inviting. We settled in, the show playing softly in the background, but it was clear neither of us was paying much attention to the screen. Instead, we talked about everything and nothing. Our dreams, our fears, the weird quirks we kept hidden from most people. At one point, Alex reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "I don't do this often," he said quietly. "Connecting with someone like this, I squeezed back, feeling this rush of emotion. Neither do I. The vulnerability in his voice made me want to protect him, to hold on to this fragile moment before life got complicated again. That night, as I left his apartment, I realized something else. I was falling for him, harder than I expected, faster than I thought possible. And even though part of me wanted to guard my heart, another part was daring to hope. Weeks passed, and our knitting club adventures turned into regular dates. Cooking dinner together, exploring new coffee shops, even taking a weekend trip to a nearby beach town. Every moment with Alex felt like peeling back layers, discovering the parts of him he didn't show the world, and sharing pieces of myself I'd kept locked away. But with that closeness came the inevitable fears. What if this didn't last? What if I was just fooling myself? And most of all, what would happen when his past caught up with him? One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Alex showed up at my door, looking worn out. I could tell something was off. "Hey," I said softly, pulling him inside. He sighed, collapsing onto my couch. "I didn't want to worry you, but there's something I need to tell you." I sat beside him, heart pounding. "You can tell me anything." He looked at me, eyes clouded with uncertainty. "There's someone from my past. Someone who doesn't really accept who I am. And I'm worried it might come back to complicate things between us." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The idea of someone trying to come between us made me clench my fists, but I also understood how heavy that kind of past could be. "Whatever it is," I said finally, "we'll face it together. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me like I'd just given him a lifeline. "Thank you, Matt. That means everything." We spent the night talking, unraveling fears and hopes like the yarn in our knitting. It wasn't easy, but it felt real. And sometimes, real was exactly what you needed. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about how strange and unexpected this journey had been, how a simple dare to join a knitting club led me to someone who made me believe in something more. And despite the uncertainties ahead, I knew one thing. With Alex, I was ready to take the risk. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Alex's past was this shadow looming over us, and I wasn't sure how or when it would spill into the quiet, cozy world we'd built. We kept things light during knitting club, throwing ourselves into yarn and patterns, but beneath the surface, I could feel the tension growing. One Wednesday, midway through the session, my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a message from an unknown number. The text was curt. "Tell Alex to stop running. We need to talk." My stomach dropped, and I felt my heart racing. I looked up at Alex, who was sitting across from me, knitting with that same focused expression. Should I show him? Did I even have the right to drag him into this now? Before I could decide, he caught my eye and raised an eyebrow. I shook my head subtly, but the message gnawed at me. After the meeting, as people were packing up, Alex pulled me aside. "Something wrong?" I hesitated, then showed him the message. His face tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "It's him," he said quietly, "the one I was telling you about. Do you want me to be there? To help?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I don't want to face this alone." That night, we agreed to meet at a neutral cafe, a place busy enough to feel safe but quiet enough to talk. When I arrived, Alex was already there, looking tense but determined. A few minutes later, a guy walked in, tall, sharp-featured, and with a coldness in his eyes that immediately set off alarms. Alex's posture stiffened, but he didn't pull away from my side. "Alex," the guy said, voice low but edged with something dangerous, "we need to sort this out." I stayed quiet, watching as Alex took a deep breath. "I'm done running," he said. "But this time, I'm not alone." The conversation that followed was tense and filled with old wounds, unspoken resentments, expectations, and the struggle for acceptance. I could see Alex holding his ground, standing taller than I'd ever seen him, but I also saw the pain beneath the surface. When it finally ended, the guy left, and Alex slumped back into his chair, exhaustion written all over his face. "Thank you for being here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Always. We walked home in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes after a storm when you just want to hold on to someone. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to settle. The shadow of Alex's past wasn't gone, but it felt less threatening with us facing it together. Our knitting club meetings became a refuge, a place where we could be ourselves without judgment. One evening, after club, Alex surprised me with a small package. Inside was a beanie, hand-knitted, soft, and in the deep purple shade he knew I liked. "I made this for you," he said, cheeks flushing a little. I pulled it on, feeling this wave of warmth, not just from the yarn, but from everything it represented. "It's perfect." He smiled, and in that moment, I knew we were weaving something stronger than any scarf or beanie. We were building a connection, stitch by stitch, vulnerable and real. And as our hands tangled together, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected places, like a knitting club full of strangers, could become the starting point for something extraordinary, something worth cherishing. Over the next few months, things settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly steady. The past wasn't gone. That shadow of complicated history still lingered, but it no longer controlled us. We had something stronger now, built on quiet afternoons of knitting, late-night talks, and the kind of easy laughter that comes when you're genuinely comfortable with someone. One Wednesday, as the club was wrapping up, Alex caught my eye across the room. He was holding up a small, awkwardly knitted square, the kind of practice piece I'd once made with zero hope. He grinned and gave me a little nod, like a silent challenge. When I approached, he passed it over. "Try this one. It's less tragic than your first." I laughed, feeling that familiar warmth between us. "Only if you promise to help me untangle the mess when I inevitably screw it up." He linked his fingers with mine. Deal. Later that evening, we sat side by side in his apartment, the city's glow filtering through the window. The yarn was spread out between us, but the knitting took a back seat to the quiet comfort of being near each other. "I didn't expect any of this," I said, tracing the lines of the scarf he was working on. "The club, the friendship, you. I never thought I'd find someone who makes all the chaos outside feel a little less crazy." He looked up, those sharp eyes softening. "Me neither, but I'm glad I did." For a moment, we just sat there, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of everything we'd been through, everything we were building. Then he reached over and brushed a stray curl off my forehead, his touch tender and deliberate. "Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you." I smiled, heart full, and squeezed his hand. Me too. In a world that often felt hurried and uncertain, we found peace in the simple act of knitting together, stitch by stitch, moment by moment. And that was enough. Because sometimes, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up, being real, and weaving your life with someone who makes the messy parts worth it. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.